The DNA of entrepreneurs. How your genes could determine your business success. Creating something new, taking calculated risks, and effectively allocating resources are all aspects of entrepreneurship. Both environmental and genetic variables play a role in this intricate process. This article will examine how a person's propensity to become an entrepreneur is influenced by genetic and environmental factors that drive entrepreneurship. Personality qualities and risk tolerance are critical genetic determinants of entrepreneurship. These characteristics can influence an individual's approach to entrepreneurship and can be inherited or learned through experience. Environmental factors can also influence a person's capacity to become an entrepreneur, including resource availability, financial security, and social networks. These elements may offer the encouragement and resources required to develop concepts into profitable businesses. In summary, entrepreneurship is a complex process driven by environmental and genetic factors. Harvey Castro is a physician, healthcare consultant, and serial entrepreneur with extensive experience in the healthcare industry. He can be reached on his website, harveycastromd.info, Twitter at harveycastromd, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. He is the author of ChatGPT in Healthcare. The Key to the New Future of Medicine, ChatGPT in Healthcare. Unlocking the Potential of Patient Empowerment. Revolutionize your health and fitness with ChatGPT's modern weight loss hacks and success reinvention. Author of the I_Driven Entrepreneur, Unleashing the Power of Artificial Intelligence for Business Success. Thanks for watching.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Castro. I'm excited about this talk. I feel like this is going to be a really great talk. I'm honored to have an amazing guest with me, and she's on the screen. Just quickly, this is just a recent book. I literally just launched this, just came out this week. And if you need to get a hold of me, I'm on social media. The symbol is just / Harvey Castro MD. The other thing is I have this fun podcast that's called the GPT podcast that I wanted to share with everyone. And literally we have several episodes, so check it out. So go ahead. Go ahead, Hared. You want to go? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yes. So, hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are located in the world. So thank you, Harvey, for having me for this. I'm very excited to have this conversation. So my name is Henrietta Sutoris, and I'm a biomedical scientist. And both my scientific and entrepreneurial pursuits have spanned a broad variety of areas in the past over 25 years. And my current focus is mostly neuroscience and mental health. And I do consulting in that area. That's one of my businesses. And I also have a new company that focuses on helping people find the best personalized treatments for addictions using digital technology. I also moved around the world quite a bit, and this will be quite relevant to this discussion because, as you can see, there is no shortage of curiosity and trying new things and not being afraid of challenges and so on. So let's jump into it right away. So I wanted to start this conversation. I was looking for definitions of entrepreneurship or entrepreneur, what it is. And there are so different definitions of people. Some people say that it's just simply starting a business or a new business. Sometimes it's specified more to an actual startup company that is supposed to take off very quickly, and so different versions. And then I found this. A person who jumps off a cliff and builds a plane on the way down. See also wizard or magician. So this sounded quite relatable to me because, again, trying new things, taking risks, and so on. So I just wanted to ask, so maybe we can start with Harvey. What would be your more business-like definition of an entrepreneur?
That's a good question. So, from an entrepreneur point of view, that's a tough question for me. The way I define it is creating something new that no one else has done and create it into a business. I know that's a very rough definition, but that's how I define it.
Okay, I think that's generally what people usually believe. So, okay, so let's move into characteristics, and we will talk about this. What characteristics entrepreneurs can have a lot in this conversation. So, if you're listening to this live, and if you want. Put it in the comments or chat what you think might be characteristics that might kind of predispose someone to be interested in entrepreneurship. So I'm not talking about success, but just interest. So just if you want. So I will go ahead and show some the results of some scientific surveys on this. And so how entrepreneurs have been described as kids, because very often, probably many of you can relate to this, that it very often starts at an early age. So that's also, it's for me, in my case, definitely, I can't remember a stage of my life when I was not interested in trying new things and very independently and so on. So how have entrepreneurs been described as kids? Loners, nerds, clowns, jocks, bullies. So it's kind of funny, but it's also true. And what are the reasons why people decide to start a business on their own? Obviously related to maybe loners and independence. Most of us want to be our own boss, and also turn passions into business. It's also a nice way to make things more efficient, because we don't necessarily need to separate hobbies from professional pursuits. So we can combine both and make money out of it and change the world in that direction. So other things are risk-taking, vision, of course, very important. Of course, we have to work very hard, and we have to be good with people, although it's not necessarily a trait, a pre-existing trait in everyone that we are good with people, but we have to learn this. It's a very important part of doing business with people, with customers. And then in terms of the age distribution, as you can see, there are all ages. Basically, there is no like one age group that is more prone to starting new businesses, although it's more the ages between 25 and 55. And then, interestingly, more than 70% of people who embark on starting their own business don't actually have a business degree. So that relates to kind of independent, doing it in our own way. So that includes me. I think Harvey is a bit different in that regard. And also interesting that more than 80% of people who have their own businesses are running solo businesses. So it's not always a company. So I have done both, and I'm doing actually both at the moment. So these two different directions. So I think what we can all agree on is that people who choose to create and lead businesses are more excited by novelty and change than those that seek stable employment. And this is very often that there is a process of this, that some people just never have any job in their life. They just complete their education and they jump in straight into starting their own business. For example, my situation was I always had own businesses on the side, but for a very long time, more than 20 years, I had stable employment in academia. So that was also like two parallel tracks. But so there are many different versions of this. And what is also important, of course, is that people usually for a business system, for starting and making businesses successful, we need to tolerate risks. And so risk tolerance is also a characteristic in psychology and now in neuroscience also, that it's a trait actually that some of us have more than others. And this risk tolerance together with a so-called internal locus of control are more likely to be, people with these are more likely to become self-employed. Internal locus of control is just a psychological buzzword for basically being self-motivated, not being so dependent on external validation and inspiration and so on. So again, it's not hard to see how that is important. These graphs, I apologize for the small print. It's from a publication. It just shows a study, the result of a study involving these characteristics. And they investigated 3 different types of self-employed people. Self-employed with employees, without employees, and then people who are managers, and so just responsible for a larger group and coordinating everything. And what really stands out first and foremost is what I already mentioned, novelty seeking. And the second one is risk taking. And in all of this group, there is a little bit of importance of trust. That's also not hard to see. That's more for the managerial types. It's not hard to see why that is important. Some of us who are very self-motivated and kind of eccentric like myself tend to also sometimes have problems with trust. That's why we don't want to be employees. That can be part of it as well. So as a neurobiologist, because I have been in neuroscience in the past more than 12 years now, and studying the brain and relevant mechanisms in the brain. As a neuroscientist, I like to think about this in the context of reward. And it's very important because reward, of course, it's an important component of business. And by reward here, I don't only mean monetary reward, so the income that we generate from the business, or the success, so status and all these accomplishments, but simply the fact of doing this and the process of doing this. And this is actually more important. Here on this picture is just a very simple representation of the brain network that is known to be involved in regulating reward processing and motivation. Just 3 different areas are highlighted here. One called striatum is responsible for reward and motivation specifically. Amygdala is implicated in emotional regulation. So of course, emotions come into play. We will get into that in a minute. And prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain behind the forehead, is also very, very important because this is important for conscious decision making and making good decisions and judging things in an appropriate way. So it's a very, very complex network. And what I would like to emphasize here is that if you ever wondered why it's so exciting to start something new without having any reward, very often with a new company or a new business, we don't have an income for a long time or success for a long time. It's quite the opposite. And it's still so exciting and so motivating. It's because it's very well known from neuroscience that the anticipation of reward can actually trigger these mechanisms that are involved in motivation, actually more than the outcome, which is as the success, the money, and so on. And so probably, as many of you can relate, that what sometimes happens is that when we achieve something, a big accomplishment, it's like more like a relief. And very often we just think, oh, that's then, and so what? So what's next? So that's because anticipation tends to trigger motivation more than actually achieving the reward. So. But of course, also comes with this high reward, high reward type, high risk, high reward type pursuit is that high novelty seekers have been shown to be prone to certain psychological or mental conditions or so-called disadvantages. And so these are very often discussed in the entrepreneurial communities that problems with mental health, regulating emotions, and so on. So three that really stands out is ADHD, bipolar disorder, and even substance use or substance abuse. And it's not so hard to see why, because ADHD, for example, someone who doesn't like to focus so much on just one task, but is interested in many different things. So it's almost like a requirement of running a business, starting a new business especially. And the more manic type state of bipolar disorder. And unfortunately, substance use disorder is also related to reward. This is something that I personally experienced. It's not the best thing to experience, but it's not uncommon at all. And unfortunately, these things sometimes come with a significant amount of stigmas. But on the other side, novelty seeking is, of course, also related to risk-taking and explorative behaviors that foster technological progress and economic development. So, but again, this curve just shows that something that the states that probably most of us are very familiar with, that these ups and downs that we all experience very often within a day or even within a single hour, related to how the business goes and self-esteem and self-perception and success perception and so on. So we have to really be able to tolerate these ups and downs. Otherwise, it's easy to get stuck. But I think it's not. It's an obvious question to ask for. Probably most of us have asked, why am I doing this to myself? And but I want to move into now is actually there are two sides of this, and but it's very often discussed is the consequences of running a stressful business. That these so-called mental health challenges or issues or disorders can be, of course, the result of a high-level long-term stress, but it's not as simple as that. What has been also shown is that they can be also, so that's why I'm using the chicken and the egg image, because it can also precede the actual action, the decision to choose this type of a lifestyle and being in business, and this is because there is a documented association between predispositions for both interest in starting new things, novelty seeking, risk-taking, as I mentioned, and these psychological challenges. And so how does it all work? So I'm a biologist by training. I have done the biological research for more than 25 years. And my original training was actually in molecular biology. And a lot of research has identified the genetic influencers for novelty seeking and risky behaviors. So genetic influencers are DNA sequences, what we call by DNA. Usually these are small parts of a gene or the DNA located in specific parts of the gene. And so it's just some genes to mention are for example, those genes that regulate reward processing, like dopamine receptors, can contain this type of sequences that have been shown to be associated with these traits. And but what is when we want to study this, what can be challenging, of course, is to separate the influence of the genetics, the inherited DNA sequences, from the effect of the environment. And so I will move into the environment a bit. But before that, this was a study in 2021, just showing a few examples, highlighting a few examples. So it's showing the associations with genetic associations for predispositions, between predispositions for certain mental health challenges and choosing self-employment. So you can see ADHD on the top of this, interestingly, autism, bipolar disorders. Of course, education, cognitive abilities, and a certain state of well-being are also important for this. So this is, again, all based on genetics, just simply purely genetics. And not very large studies, but quite limited. So it will be interesting as these studies expand to see how and this is validated. So I want to share a bit of personal story that is related to this. So as I mentioned, I'm a molecular biologist, and a few years ago, I had my whole genome sequenced. And of course, I was with my curiosity, I jumped into it and analyzed everything I could get out of it. And my own DNA sequence indeed contains some of those genetic sequences for that predispose that have been associated with novelty seeking or risk taking. Interestingly, also that both lineages of my family have many different mental health challenges, and I experienced a few of those myself, including the substance abuse that I turned into a business later on. So it's all like comes together. And in terms of the environment, I got actually quite lucky early in life. This is a picture of me about 20 years ago with my parents. And so I was fortunate to have very, very supportive parents. So they always encouraged me to seek out whatever I wanted for myself. Whenever I were, even when my interest led me far away from the home to different countries, so I couldn't see the family anymore and so on. This is a picture of my father, who was an entrepreneur. And I actually started my first business together with him at the age of 19. And when I was younger, I often thought that maybe when I get older, age simply would temper this drive for novelty, starting new projects, taking risks and variety. But this is yet to come. So it's that, if anything, it's the opposite direction so far. So okay, so we are talking about the environment, and so how does it work? So it's actually the main group of mechanisms that are important, that have been implicated in this, are called epigenetic mechanisms, and probably many of you have heard this term. So epi means above, genetics, genome, so above the genome. These are mechanisms that regulates how genes function, that turns genes on and off. And what is very important to know about this, there are many, many different epigenetic mechanisms known. It's a very, very hot field of study in the context of not only mental health and lifestyle choices and things like this, and the personality traits, but also different diseases. And the way it works is that it interacts with the genome directly. It's something like this. There are proteins that directly bind to the DNA, and it's very important that they are responsive to environment or experience. It can be either our own experience, but even previous generations. So it has been shown, it was also part of my own study for many years, that environmental experience and the epigenetic effects of those can also be inherited, passed through generations. So it's very important to keep in mind, because especially for those of you who have children, so how we handle them and how we probably try to encourage them and contribute to their well-being and choosing the best life, making the best life choices and careers. And all these mechanisms together, so the DNA sequence and these epigenetic mechanisms and the regulation of genes, is what ultimately contributes to behavior and when we change behavior. And so the way it works is that when there is an effect coming from the environment, it can directly affect how these mechanisms work, and by doing so, the functioning of genes will change, increase or decrease, and so on. Depends where. So it just change where the genes, which gene is expressed in which tissue type, and so on. So it's very responsive to environment in every way. So it's not only positive way or only negative way, and many different ways. So it's very important to keep in mind. It's not only just genes and environment, but development as well. And so the only thing I want to mention with this complicated image here is that there are different stages of development, and probably most of you are familiar with the knowledge that young people are more sensitive to environmental effects, and this is because everything is still developing. When we reach adulthood, that development settles down, but it never really stops. So basically, every single stage of this developmental cycle can be influenced by environment, including the germ cells. So even before birth, even before conception, germ cells can be influenced epigenetically, or the developing embryo before birth and different stages after birth throughout our lives. And again, as I mentioned, some of this can also be passed down through generations, so important to keep in mind. So this is you can see it's very complex, and it's still ongoing. This research has not gone too far. At the moment, it's just regarding entrepreneurship and these personality traits. And the future of this science, of course, will lie in the integration, the meaningful integration of these different aspects of genomics, epigenomics, proteomics, so those proteins that are involved in the epigenetic regulation and so on, and the microbiome, probably many of you have heard of, that are also related to mental health and many other things. So we will need to integrate this into a much more systematic, larger picture, because it all works together as a system. So how can we use this information constructively or not so constructively? First, I would like to mention some potential risks for, so if we continue to accumulate this type of knowledge, this research will of course go on. These are very interesting questions. And of course, investigating the underlying drives of business, it has business interests. So many companies are actually have a direct interest in speeding up this type of research. But there can be potential risks, and because this maybe sounds a bit like a science fiction, but without just imagine that if we know what predispositions can be associated with business interest, not necessarily success, but an interest or an inclination for business. This can potentially generate discriminations. And there are already so many discriminations in the world, so we don't want to add anything more. So this will have to be regulated. Of course, we are not at this stage yet, because these technologies are not as advanced as, every moment. For example, today I could just see what's going on in my DNA, my epigenetics, and so on. But I'm pretty certain the technology will eventually get there, and so we will have to think about this carefully. So just some specific things to mention that how this could be potentially misused is. For example, that even just very early in life, potentially educators could discriminate students before they enter into business type educations or other programs based on this, and select for those that carry these epigenetic predispositions or traits, personality traits. Another one that is also, of course, for especially when we start new businesses, especially if it's going to be a bigger idea, a more expensive pursuit, we usually need money and need to seek investments. And so, of course, we don't want investors to discriminate investees based on this type of information. So let's say prefer those that carry these traits versus those that do not. So part of this, why we don't need to take this, of course, it's very interesting, and this is serious science that will expand, but we have to keep in mind that this is nothing is really set in stone, and not everyone has these genetic backgrounds or epigenetic and environmental experiences and backgrounds. And it's all very, very flexible, and what makes it flexible, another level of this, is what is in neuroscience, from neuroscience, is known as neuroplasticity. Probably many of you have heard this word. It is basically the ability of the nervous system to change activity in response to either internal or external stimuli by reorganizing its structure, functions, and connections. And so this is also it's ongoing. It's the very complex networks in the brain, actually the whole body. And these changes and these reorganizations are ongoing every moment, every second, even when we are asleep and we are not aware of what is going on. And this can also respond to environment and experience and even unconscious processes, so many different things. And also it makes the whole system vulnerable or sensitive to actually consciously chosen acts. So, for example, if we choose certain lifestyles that are either positive or negative, so the ways we live that can interact with these mechanisms and make them more ingrained, make the consequences more ingrained, or reorganize the whole system. So it's very important to think about neuroplasticity. It's something that we can take advantage of. So it means that it gives us a very high level of power over choice, and this also means that the feature that as I mentioned, that some people do carry these backgrounds like the genetics and epigenetics, environmental, early life effects. But it's not for everyone. Probably there are some of you in the audience who do not identify with these early life experiences and environments. And so there is no actual evidence that any of these are that any of these are either necessary or sufficient for success. So what has been shown here, what I spoke about before, is more the initiation of the entrepreneurial pursuit. The success is a whole different thing. Of course, the two interact, so we can take advantage of the predispositions in both positive and negative ways. So the biological makeup is, of course, very important, but as I mentioned, life is by no way deterministic. And it's among many other things, it's because of these epigenetic mechanisms and the neuroplasticity that make every state flexible, and we have the power to influence this with the choices and the ways we live. And this is very important also because there are so many discussions about the stress and how to handle the stress coming with running a business and starting a new business. It's always very stressful. Usually it's a long-term stress. It's not an acute trauma even. And so it's very important to keep in mind that it's good to make healthy choices and think about even long before we actually get there, even if someone realizes at an early age that they want to go down this avenue, to think about establishing a healthy lifestyle. And there is so much information about this in the world now. So there are so many choices and so many options for this. And it's also not only for us, as I mentioned, it can be also passed down through generations. So we can think about how we treat our children, or if those of us who mentor young people or older people, that can also be integrated into a mentorship to encourage healthy choices. So, in my opinion, it's better not to view these predispositions as inherently positive or negative, if you want, even the potential mental health challenges coming with it, but just simply something facts that exist, and this is worthy of more understanding, more investigation, because you can use this information very constructively to nurture and entrepreneurship, and as I mentioned, to encourage our children, our mentees, and so on and so on, and ourselves as well, with making healthy choices, and how we manage our lifestyles. So how does it all come together? So ultimately, learning to manage these complex features and the interactions in a flexible and strategical way is much more the ticket to success than simply having the biological traits in the first place. And this is just a complex image showing. I just want to point out, we talked about personality and the biological predispositions. Of course, in order to run a business successfully, business almost always involves other people, community, customers, business partners, and so on in the long run. So we need to be able to use human capital very constructively, very well. And this is sometimes a challenge, especially for those of us who were not born with, or who were not, just a young age. We didn't develop very good people skills. So this have to be developed. But this can also be misused potentially. Because, and one thing that I like to discuss also online when I respond to comments about this is the role of community in this. Community is a very positive thing, and support, support networks and support systems, but it can also be it can also have negative effects sometimes, and overusing this. So sometimes because it generates a social reward. It's a very strong reward for the brain. From neuroscience, we know this very well, and we are biologically made to respond very strongly to social interactions. And so we don't want to become dependent too much upon this. So in my opinion, it's very important to also develop skills that we can regulate ourselves using just our own resources and lifestyle choices and so on. And also, ultimately, of course, in order to be successful, what is more important than anything is the action. And so this lists a few aspects of this. So we have to manage this at every moment, every single day actively. So it's very important not to get stuck, because if we are stuck, not even the best vision and the best ideas and the best backgrounds and skills and environment will lead anywhere. So we need to turn this into action eventually in order to be successful. So probably you can see now that the initiation and the predispositions and these personality traits and the ultimate success are two different things, although they are, of course, intertwined and they interact. And we can take advantage of our predispositions and these traits both negatively and positively. What we need to do is use them proactively. So finally, of course, this can lead to, if you do this very well, this will lead to a development of resilience and not getting stuck, and practical accomplishments that are more important than just talking about it. And as expressed here, while you guys argued whether the glass is full or empty, I saw the glass. That's what we want to achieve, of course, right? As entrepreneurs, as business people. So to make this efficient and not to get stuck in this, even our own mental health ups and downs and turmoils that will be, of course, always part of this process. So again, learn how to manage this very well. So this is what I wanted to discuss today. So and now we can probably move into discussing a bit more questions or comments.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Literally, I have two screens and it went blank and I couldn't control anything. So I had to turn on another computer. That's why I'm looking to my right. So I apologize. So let's go over a lot of this. A lot of great questions. I want to thank everyone, including our speaker today, to kind of go over everything. I love this talk she's given. A lot of great information, and I have great questions. So I'm going to show the first question from Joseph here, and he says, I wonder how dopamine disorders such as ADHD contribute to this discussion. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this is one thing that I don't know if it was visible, but I showed that there is indeed, it has been shown that there is an association between ADHD diagnosis and self-employment, preferences for self-employment. And so, of course, ADHD, as it's mentioned in the comment, that's the dopamine system and the dopamine regulation is involved. And so ADHD develops because there are deficits or dysregulation in these circuits. It's not only the dopamine, it's a bit more complicated, but the dopamine is very, very important for it. One thing that I like to really, that I really like to emphasize is that we can, even if someone has this predisposition or this condition, ADHD, dopamine deficits, things like that, we can interfere with that taking advantage of those flexibilities that I mentioned, because we can, as I mentioned, we can influence those with our choices. So there are many, using the knowledge from neuroscience that is available today, we can actually actively hack into those mechanisms and learn to regulate those dysregulations and to make them better consciously. So there are many just simple things everyone knows about exercise, like just healthy lifestyles in general. But it's much more than that. This is actually something that I really like. I love to discuss in much more depth. So anyone who is interested, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to even recommend detailed resources for this, how that can offer practical tips how to take advantage of the dopamine system and these regulatory systems, and potentially turn those deficits into something that works better. This is something that I learned to optimize myself in my own case, especially after recovering from my substance use disorder. That was, of course, made everything a bit more complicated. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. We have several questions, so I'm going to try to make sure we hit all of them. The next question: if someone doesn't have the entrepreneur genotype, is there evidence of what epigenetic factors can mimic an entrepreneur's phenotype, so those not born with it can know they aren't held back by their genes? So the way I see this question, I wish it was that easy, that it was just pure genetics or pure environment. I think it's a combination of both. And I honestly think as much as we study this, there's still a lot of unknown territory, because if you really look at some people, they may have all the right things. They may have the genetics, they may have the environment, but yet they aren't entrepreneurs. And so I want to preface with, the answer to me, in my opinion, is yes, you can technically not have the genotype or the phenotype, but still be an entrepreneur, in the sense that there's other things, like she mentioned, the epigenetics. There's just other things going on in our environment that may trigger another part of you to express itself, and that in itself can become an entrepreneur. Just to give you a quick anecdotal interesting cases. For example, there's talk or rumors or debate on Van Gogh. Van Gogh, they believe that maybe he suffered from the digoxin toxicity, and that's why his vision was altered, and that's why his paintings are so different. And that in itself created this entrepreneur. And so is it the environment? Is it his medication? Or is this all not nonsense? We don't know. But the point is, it's more complicated. So did you want to say anything, or you want to jump to the next question?
Yeah, just one thing quickly is that it's not only it's not only the passive environment that we can use proactively, but we can, as I mentioned, we can create the environment with our own lifestyle choices, and the brain and the whole body is responsive to do, and those mechanisms are responsive to environment even in adulthood. So in our whole life. So it's so we have a lot of. We have a high level of power to influence those. It's creating it if it's not given.
Great, thank you. Phil just asked, is there a standard answer for late starters as entrepreneurs, people who begin late 40s or 50s? I'm going to jump on this one, and then basically the way I see it is, it's never too late. The difference is at some point in your life, you decide to hit the trigger. And I think sometimes as we age, we gain so much wisdom, and we learn what not to do, what not to create. And we see mistakes of others, and we're more prone to say, you know what, I think I can do it now. I know personally, I feel more optimistic on the projects that I personally do. And I'm almost 50 compared to when I was in my 20s and in my teens when I started my first business. Obviously, I've made so many mistakes. But my point is this: it's never too late. A couple of years ago, I spoke to a colleague. He was 75 years old. He opened up a book of all his inventions and all the things he had, and I was astonished that he never pulled the trigger. We had a nice conversation, and after that conversation, he actually decided to start his first company. And I'm just happy to see that he did it. Granted, he was in his 70s, but he did it, and that was the main thing for me. Do you have anything else to add?
There have actually been studies showing that in terms of success, people who start, it doesn't really matter if it's first business or whatever business, but start a business in their 40s tend to be more, there is a higher success rate. So it's
awesome. All right, next question. And thank you for that question. The next one, does being an entrepreneur change one's dopamine receptors, or an entrepreneur simply born with different brain characteristics? That as a doctor, I would have to say the answer is yes. Your dopamine receptors can change and alter by these stimulus that you're giving your body. And so in theory, different inputs in your body can stimulate different parts of your body and can cause receptors to change. And so again, that's just one of many factors. I personally feel that, is it an accident that I went into emergency medicine as opposed to dermatology? I was drawn to that quick decision, risk taker, aggressiveness, making seconds decisions, because if I didn't, someone may die. That personality, did that help me in the sense that I am more likely to take risk and start businesses and be more aggressive and be okay with failure? Or is it just my environment that I've been trained in the emergency room and see death and see many stresses that has created a person in me to be an entrepreneur? So I just posed that question based on what you said. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's definitely two things I want to share is that, first of all, simply embarking on an entrepreneurial pursuit, it's from my own life, that can be sometimes part of a healing journey. If someone is predisposed to this, some deficits, they have by, from birth, deficits in the dopamine system and these mechanisms. It can be actually used actively as an environmental and a component and own life experience to elevate those mechanisms and to make them work better. And I experienced this myself, for example, when I mentioned that I struggled with mental health. There were different things. The substance use was the most challenging. And coming out of that, every single time when I resolved those periods, every single time after that involved starting something new, a business or a new scientific study and things, the whole brand new project, move to a different place and so on. And I feel that it really, really helped me to actually fix myself, to put it that way. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's very important to keep in mind that we can also make bad choices. And it's, again, my own example, the substance use. I mean, it's not always completely a choice, but if we keep it in mind that some of us may have the predispositions, how we manage those potential deficits or dopamine deficits and what we were not given. And don't get into drugs. It's very easy because it's just there, and it's like taking a pill or a drink or anything. So don't go down that route because it's much, much more difficult to fix later on. So.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're going to hit the last couple of questions here. The next one, it's our statement. Let's see. It says, so fascinating seeing how even in the face of environment and instinctual genetic factors, human can choose to change their state. It's really interesting how the environment can change us. I know for me, I'm the first generation studied in my family, first generation American, and literally come from a poor poverty state growing up, and that environment, you can make the argument chicken or the egg, that creates something in me that pushes me to create. I've had over 20 successful companies, and I'm not bragging in any way. I'm just showing that when you look at the statistics of who are physicians in the United States, when you look at the risk factors, I didn't have a high percentage of becoming a doctor. So I'm just adding that point as a point of conversation, just to say, is it the environment, is it genetic, or is it both? Do you have anything to add? If not, we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, just quickly that it's from the point of view of a biologist, evolution actually. So it makes sense from the point of view of evolution that we are so responsive to environment, because we never live isolated from the environment. So that's how humans and everything evolved all together as a system, together with the environment. So we have developed these mechanisms that make everything so flexible, have developed for us to survive and adapt to the environment better.
Excellent point. Next question. I just want to make sure I don't skip any negative. Let's see. Did I hit this one already? Yeah. Or no?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Do any negative characteristics occur more commonly with entrepreneur leaning, arrogance, or less warm? Do you follow that question? I'm trying to think about it.
I think I understand this. This is actually something that I think about quite often, to be honest, because it's definitely I mean, it's coming from, it's just who is successful in business, and there are the stereotypes and people who are very, coming from very, the boss type, very strong, very, very often comes with arrogance, a certain, level of narcissism or whatever we want to call it. Of course, those things exist, but I think it's very important to learn, if for those of us who are prone to this, to recognize these tendencies in ourselves and to learn to manage it a bit better. That can also be, that's a whole different discussion, that
Okay.
aggression, arrogance, that also has underlying genetic associations. That's actually also something that I learned, I had to learn to manage in myself, because I was also a bit prone to those things when I was younger, sometimes still.
Okay, I understand the question. I would say the following. This is my personal bias opinion. I think in general, if you have a business, ideally it's great to have two business partners, and you want to have someone that is not like you. You want to have someone that ideally is somewhat opposite, but more important, it complements you. So if you're really good at certain parts, then ideally you want someone that's good at something that you're not, so that both together can create a new product. To this point of having someone that has possibly negative characteristics, arrogance, maybe narcissist, not that I'm advocating those, but in essence, it may be okay to balance you. You may be the optimist and you may need a pessimist to create that balance. So I'm just going to pose that question. So let's jump to the next one. So in the face of early failure, would psychological intervention help early first-time entrepreneurs cope with failure to help them move forward and continue entrepreneur pursuits? I honestly think yes. I think I say the following always. If you're going to fail, that's okay, but you must learn from your mistakes. If you don't learn from your mistakes and you keep making the same mistake, then that's not going to help you as an entrepreneur. But honestly, I encourage people to talk about their failures and share their failures. Everything's not roses. I know personally I have fallen on my face multiple times, but the difference is learning from my mistake and then actually getting up and doing it again, because unfortunately some people, we get scarred from trauma in the sense that we fail, and then that might be the time that we shouldn't have stopped. We may have tried to do the next invention or the next idea, and that might be the winner, but if we stop, we will never know. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, it's just to add that. So how psychological intervention works. So that's also one of those things that can affect those epigenetic mechanisms that we discussed. So that's how it works. So it can. So it's one type of an environmental effect or experience. So not everyone is responsive to it equally well. So just
Great.
something to try.
Well, we're going to try to hit these last questions. We have about 7, I think, and we got about 10 minutes. So the next one is, how can neuroscience best inform entrepreneurship? I think you did an amazing job explaining the neuroscience and understanding the brain and how it works. Obviously, if you have any more questions, please feel free to hit her up. She's got all these references. She's bombarded me with amazing documents, because I was giving a talk about a month ago and she did an amazing job. So my advice to an entrepreneur having her background would be, the more we know about the science of entrepreneurship, I feel like the better. Another statement is the 10,000 hour rule. The more you do something, you're going to get better. So why not learn the neuroscience, learn every different angle of it, because then you'll become a better leader / entrepreneur. The next question, just stating that they're a publisher. I'm just, in the interest of time, I want to get to the other ones. That gives me hope. Not giving up. I'm an example of your 75-year-old. Thank you both for your disruptive, bold, brave initiatives. I really appreciate that. Honestly, I think both of us enjoy doing this for hearing comments like this and making a difference. So thank you for stating that. Next question. Okay, here's a question. Does birth order matter? I'm thinking the youngest sometimes are more free to branch out. Oh, I love this one. I'm going to give it a stab and then give you the stab. So basically, unknown user here. I'm joking. Basically, a couple of things. I do believe in birth order. There's so much psychology that the difference between the first child is going to be different from the second, from the third, and the fourth. I do believe it's interesting. I personally, from my personal bias opinion, I feel like my firstborn child tends to be my type A straight shooter. My older generation children tend to be more relaxed. And I don't know if that's parenting or if that's just personality. And so it makes it a little tough because the straight shooter is more likely that if I give him a cookbook or tell him, hey, this is how it's done, he will follow step by step. Whereas the later generation may not follow the recipe, may be so liberal and more creative, but that in itself is an advance because you don't want a cookie cutter. Sometimes you want to have that creativity in entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
What
just
do
to
you?
mention quickly that there have actually been studied on this, the birth order, that shows that there is a it's actually a weak association, but an association that the oldest sibling, as Harvey alluded to, tend to be more interested in self-employment, starting businesses and so on. I'm an only child, so no personal experience.
Oh, interesting. So am I. I'm an only child, and I can only speak from my children's point of view and just kind of seeing. I mean, overall, I'm happy that this is recorded. And obviously, we're on LinkedIn, so feel free to hit us up if you have any questions. As an aside, I did create a podcast. I'm just going to mention it. It's called the GPT Podcast. The reason I'm mentioning it is because we are doing a series of entrepreneurship lectures. We've already have about 3 or 4, and every week we're releasing one. Just as a AI geekiness to share with you, the voice when you listen to it is actually synthesized. It is not me, but is my voice. And then the content between my business partner and I is actually AI creating a conversation about the topic. So it's kind of interesting because technically we did not have that conversation, but technically we did come up with the content and we did push it through ChatGPT. So from a nerdy side, I just wanted to share that because it's kind of neat. Here's another comment. I'm the youngest of 5 and most successful. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, and proves another point. I'm going to go through see if there's any more questions, which I do not see any. Do you have anything else to add?
Not really. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. It seems like we had a really quite interested audience interested in this discussion. So please, just want to tell you that please reach out to me if anyone has questions about details of anything that we discussed today or I discussed today. As I mentioned in the beginning, part of what I do is consulting, and so I'm very, very happy to share with you more resources, practical tips, and even develop potentially collaborations if anyone is interested in developing studies in this direction, or just using the information for bettering their own lives and business. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll be doing this again in the near future. Like I said, and she said, if you have any questions, please hit us up. She's an amazing resource. I really appreciate her, and I appreciate everyone here. And with that said, hit us up if you missed the call and share it with your friends. And I'm going to end this with a quick video, and goodbye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.